and today we're going to be talking about the Agile Release Train process. We're going to talk about it in three different sections. So what we have is we're going to talk about forming Agile Release Trains. We're going to talk about the events associated with Agile Release Trains, and we're going to talk about Agile Release Train metrics that you can use and improvements that you could consider if you're looking to, positively affect those metrics. My name is Brian Carman. I'm your host for today. So, forming Agile Release Trains. This is something we get asked about quite frequently, and there's been a lot of guidance on this from kind of Scaled Agile over the last sort of 12 or 18 months, and we start talking about operational value streams and development value streams as part of this kind of context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step you through the kind of how operational value stream and development value stream relate to Agile Release Trains, and this is kind of the model that we would suggest. And I'm going to go through over the next few slides this in more detail, but just to kind of give you a heads up on the process. The idea is to identify one or more operational value streams, then one or more development value streams that are associated with that operational value stream, and then we think about how we can form our Agile Release Train around those development value streams. As I say, what we'll do is we'll work through that on the following slides. What I'd advise is that we're going to step through that process, and the things we're going to look to avoid doing, and you do see this sometimes. So what we're going to do is we're going to avoid forming Agile Release Train that's based around a particular skill set. So we're not going to have an Agile Release Train which is fundamentally full of front end developers or other specialisms, DBAs or something like that are working across the business on lots and lots of different areas. That's not an Agile Release Train. That's just a kind of a function. We're not going to form them around specific silos. So if you've got a group of people that just look after your kind of warehousing side of things, and you've got much more kind of types of work that's going on, then we wouldn't form an Agile Release Train about warehousing. If you're a warehousing business and that's what you do, then yes, you could probably have an Agile Release Train that's focusing on the functioning of that kind of warehouse and things like that. But we wouldn't do that. And probably the most common thing, but again, something we'd look to avoid, is forming your Agile Release Train around specific projects. So we don't form an Agile Release Train about a kind of temporary structure like a project. The exception here will be if it's a really, long-term investment. There's a program of work that's going to be, 24 months or 30 months long in terms of doing it. That's if it's that kind of time scale, then creating Agile Release Train and progressively building a kind of a product under the banner of a project or program may well work. But if it's a short-term goal, you've got a 3-month project you're trying to deliver, then you wouldn't create and disband an Agile Release Train for that. So those are the things to look out for. How do we want to do this? So the first thing that we would suggest is to think about an operational value stream. What do we mean by that? We mean that there is some sort of trigger, a series of actions that take place within the organization in association with its customers, and at the end of it, it releases some sort of value. So we get paid, stuff like that. And typically what you've got is business owners who are responsible for this operational value stream, getting the value out of it. And they're not necessarily very technically minded, that they are business people, business minded, trying to do this. So let's have an example of an operational value stream. So here, as an example, what I've suggested is, a car sales value stream. So the customer, the trigger point is the customer contacting the dealer in order to purchase a car. And actually, what happens a lot nowadays is that they might think they want to purchase the car, but actually 90% of private new cars are sold through some sort of leasing or finance arrangement. So the sales team will talk to that customer. They'll agree the specification of the vehicle. They'll agree what kind of warranty might come along with that vehicle, and probably the terms of the finance for that vehicle. If that all gets agreed, they'll place an order with the manufacturer to meet that specification, and then in due course, at some point later, they will receive the car from that manufacturer. They'll go through some checks to make sure it does comply with the specifications. Then the customer will collect that car from the dealer, and at which point, typically it will be the finance company that actually pays the dealer, because it's a finance company that effectively kind of then deals with the customer from that point on. Now, this doesn't cover every possible scenario. What we have here is maybe some people, they've just cash in the bank, they don't take finance, and they buy the car in that way. And you can get mixed up in all these different routes and paths and stuff like that. But fundamentally, when you're looking at an operational value stream, what you're trying to do is show the kind of main flow, the typical business. And yes, there'll be exceptions in there, and yes, you'll need to cater for those kind of things. But when you're trying to illustrate it, really try and think about what is fundamentally what we're doing here. So that's the operational value stream. Hopefully, we can understand that there's a business model behind this. It isn't necessarily something that happens on a single day. This thing could be weeks and months, between the specification, the order being placed, the vehicle arriving. So that's the business. So when we're looking at development value streams, these are the set of actions that take place in order to make improvements to that operational value stream. So we have a business, hopefully it's a profitable business, hopefully it's working, but we have ideas on how that could be improved. And the method of making those improvements are what we call development value streams. Now that could be quite a technical process, looking at the systems, or it could be an operational a process where we're experimenting with different ways of working, and with developing that operational value stream through process change. But that way of working where we have some ideas and we go through a process to implement those ideas is the development value stream. So in our example, let's say we've got a pre-sale system, and our development value stream here is about making improvements to that pre-sales system. So maybe that's the ability to choose different finance packages, the ability to choose different variations, different specifications of the vehicles. Maybe we are constantly updating our connections to the manufacturer's system so we can get the latest information from those. There's a whole load of things that could come under that kind of pre-sales or sales bit. And maybe we've got another development value stream that's associated with kind of the post-sale. So the car's turned up, dealer needs to do those pre-collection checks, and we need to make sure that the transition to the customer is smooth, make sure the vehicle's taxed, that kind of thing. So in this example, we've got, we're thinking about different areas of the system. One, doing the deal on one is trying to make sure that everything's smooth in terms of the collection. Okay, so what would that mean in terms of an agile release train? Well, one thing to bear in mind is that there isn't necessarily a single right answer here, because it very much depends on your uh, environment, the size of your team, the technicalities of your system. So let's just talk through a few examples. Okay, so potentially we could have an agile release train that's really focused on that pre-sales system. So maybe we've got 8 teams when we add them together that are looking at all those different systems, a couple that look after the finance systems, some that look at manufacturers, and maybe some of them that are focused on the interface that the sales team have, you know. And when we add that together, we think, well, that's quite a bit of work. We've got 80 or 90 people within this agile release train, and this would be a nice distinct part of the system with few dependencies across different areas. So this would make a nice agile release train. And potentially we have a similar kind of thing with those kind of the post-sales stuff. Maybe there's enough teams, enough work, enough ideas for this to be a separate agile release train, and sufficient independence from the earlier one for these to run kind of separately. It could be that actually, when we're thinking about this agile release train, we're still affecting a lot of parts of the process. So we might need to make sure that the changes are reflected across the system. So let's say there was an option to buy roof bars with your car. That would obviously have to be both in the sales part of the system and the kind of collection part of the system. So you could end up with an agile release train that actually covers the whole system itself. Maybe you've got 8, 10, 12, up to 12 is the maximum really, teams looking after these systems, and it just makes sense to think of this as a whole. So we have those 2 different development value streams, but from an organizational point of view, from a dependency point of view, it makes sense to look at this as a whole and plan accordingly. So the important thing is to get the operational value stream, understand those development value streams, and then make a choice, make a decision, run with it, and potentially, change it if from experience you find it would work better as a single agile release train or independent agile release trains. So those are the considerations when we are talk about forming our agile release train. So with our agile release trains, those business owners that we looked at early on, so those kind of people up here that are running, responsible for the effectiveness and the profitability potentially of that operational value stream, we consider those to be part of our agile release train. We're going to talk about events in a second. They've got key roles in program increment planning and at the review sections and stuff like that. And ultimately, it's their business model, their operational value stream that we're looking to improve. So they've got a key interest. So we consider them part of the agile release train. They're not necessarily in the development value streams. Yeah, they're worrying about the operational stuff. They care about what the development value streams deliver, but they're not really part of those groups. And really, we can think about the agile release train as connecting those development value streams, the people who are kind of building the stuff and making the improvements, with those business owners who are really the recipients of those and interested in those and want to make sure that those changes are effective and successful as possible. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the Agile Release Train events. So we've spoken about things like PO planning, so just going to talk about what that means in more detail. So the first event that we have in an Agile Release Train is the program increment planning. And what we're looking at here is a backlog for that Agile Release Train, which is called the program backlog. And this is the person accountable for this, or people accountable for this, is product management. So what they have is a list of priority features that these teams, this Agile Release Train should work on. And there are effectively two different types of these, two main types. You've got business features. So these are the things that once implemented are going to actually deliver value there and then to the organization. So as soon as we've released it, you know, and it's effective, we are getting value from that. The second type are enabler features. So these are things which are going to create opportunities in the future. So this could be switching from one technical implementation to another technical implementation, whereas on its own, it might not necessarily add that much value, but maybe there's much more you can do with it after it's switched. So it enables, you know, future business features to be implemented. So those are the two different types of objects that come in. Often, what will happen during program increment planning is that an agile team will take one of those features and break them down into individual stories that they can deliver as a team. Often, they would have had sight of these business features ahead of program increment planning, partly to check they've got the right technical specialisms to support that, and partly to see if the features are small enough so that they could deliver it, and just so they can start potentially experimenting with ideas ahead of PI planning, so they've got a good kind of idea of what will be involved. And so what they do during PI planning is they create a forecast of which stories they believe they can deliver in each iteration, to help them decide if they can actually deliver that business feature or enabler feature. And as part of this process, what they do is they create objectives for the PI. So kind of plain language, this is what we think we can achieve. And it might specifically relate to that feature. It could be individual aspects of that feature, but it's basically saying to the team, this forecast is for us, really. You know, this is for us to our kind of working out. The objectives is what we're telling you we believe we can achieve. And associated with that will be a number of risks or challenges that may affect their ability to deliver those PI objectives. So the team get an opportunity to talk these through. And the significant thing about program increment planning is that I mentioned the Agile Release Train has typically got between 5 and 12 teams, is that those teams do these concurrently. So within program increment planning, there's a kind of briefing period where they get information from the business owners, from the product managers, from the engineers and architects. And so they get these features, and then these teams work on these concurrently, and they get opportunities to confer with each other, to identify dependencies, to plan in those dependencies, and come up with and it can take kind of 2 days typically, come up with a program plan or a program board which highlights collectively what they're going to be able to deliver and those dependencies between the teams. So on here, this is typically what one would look like. You've got, you know, 5 teams here. You could have more than that, and they'll say these blue things represent the key aspects, potentially the features that we're going to deliver, and where we've got cross-team dependencies, we've discussed those, we've identified those, we've recognized those, and we've put a marker on here. If you're using a physical board, the tradition is to use kind of red string to connect these together. So you get all these bits of red string connecting the dependencies to the features which they're dependent on. And this is one of your key outputs in PI planning, that those teams have worked together. They come up with a board which illustrates those dependencies. So they can now see how their work affects each other and how they can work together to deliver this list of features for the organization. The other key output from program increment planning are these objectives. I mentioned each team is going to be writing down those objectives. These are actually going to get reviewed by the business owners, and the business owners are going to assign a value to these, just a number between 1 and 10, just to say how much value they think it's bringing to those operational value stream, how useful that's going to be. So each team's got its list of objectives. It's got a score for those in terms of the value to the business, but also collectively, and the release train engineers responsible for this, they will bring together a kind of summarized list of objectives that represent what that whole program increment itself is trying to achieve. And so what we have is a high level illustration of the dependencies and how they kind of relate, the work the team relates to each other, and also this kind of expectation setting, which is set by the teams. This isn't dictated to the teams, it's set by the teams. They're saying, well, you've given us those priorities, this is what we believe we can achieve. And so the business owners and other people now have an expectation set, and hopefully a degree of confidence about what improvements are going to come through for their operational value stream, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So that's the output of program increment planning. That happens at the beginning of this program increment. And a program increment is a period of time, typically 8, 10, or 12 weeks long. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we're planning for. And when we look at this program board, each of these iterations is like to be typically about 2 weeks. So that's the kind of timescale we're talking about. So if it's 12 weeks, then that's, effectively, we're talking about a quarter of a year. So some people, as shorthand, would refer to it as, quarterly planning for a kind of 12-week period. But the correct terminology in terms of SAFe will be program increment planning, and that could be 8, 10, or 12 weeks. So that's great. We've got that output. What do we do with it? Well, typically every week or so, the members of the Agile Release Train will go in and, check progress against that, program board and those objectives. And this can happen in a couple of different ways. If you've got a fairly small Agile Release Train, then you probably have one event called an ArtSync, Agile Release Train synchronization event. And at that event, you'll have the Scrum Masters, the product owners, the product management, release train engineers, and system architects, people like that, all talking about, how their respective teams are progressing, challenges they've had, impediments they've made, whether the objectives are still valid, and just a conversation, and with particular reference to things like these dependencies. Is Team 4 going to finish that story in time so that Team 2 can deliver that, the feature that has had that dependency? If not, can we adjust things? Can we adapt things so that we can still meet our objectives, even if we've had to adapt things along the way? So if it's a big Agile release train, 10, 11, 12 teams, then that will be a bit cumbersome with all those people involved. And so we would have it as 2 different meetings: a Scrum of Scrum events facilitated by the release train engineer, principally involving the Scrum Masters. So this is, we had that question earlier about the Scrum of Scrum Masters, and this is probably an example of where that kind of language makes a lot of sense, really, because here we've got a release train engineer facilitating that event where the Scrum Masters get together and they have that conversation principally about dependencies and impediments. How do we allow our teams to, deliver successfully against this plan that they have come up with, and then as a separate session, we can have a PO sync event. The release train engineer would still facilitate this, but product management would really be involved and hear them thinking more about, the value and the objectives and how we can deliver those. What have we learned? Have there been changes in the market? Has anything affected what we should be prioritizing? So they're thinking about it from that point of view. Scrum Masters, RTE, thinking more about delivery. So yes, if there's a big one, these would probably be separate events. And these would happen during the program increment itself as we progress through. Another event which happens as we're progressing through, and it happens after each iteration, is a system demo. So this is where it's a show and tell event, really, and it summarizes the deliveries that have been done across all those agile teams within that iteration. So every 2 weeks or so, what we're doing is we're kind of showcasing what the teams have done, and it's an opportunity for the business owners as well as product management to understand, how much progress the Agile Release Train is making, and this might factor into other work. What we also have at the end of the program increment is an inspect and adapt workshop. So this is a bit like in a single team, you might have a review session, a retrospective session. So this inspect and adapt workshop is that kind of thing, but for the whole program increment, for the whole Agile Release Train. And there we have a PI systems demo, which is a bit like the systems demo we just talked about, but here we're going to be demonstrating all the work that's completed across the whole 8, 10, 12 weeks, the whole program increment, just in case there are some of these business owners that weren't able to attend, or other stakeholders that weren't able to attend each of those events. This is where we kind of summarize what the work's been done. And then kind of following that demonstration, what we have is, I mentioned that those business owners are going to kind of score those objectives out of 10 at PI planning to see how much value they think they will deliver. They score that again based on what was actually delivered. So if it was delivered exactly as they anticipated and they still think it's got the same level of value, they would give it the same score. If maybe it was partially delivered, maybe we were trying to reduce the speed of a particular operation by 30 seconds and it's been reduced by 25 seconds, then maybe they'll give it a slightly lower score because it's not been as effective. We're going to talk about measurements in the last section, so I'm not going to go into too much more detail here, but there's this stage within it. And then the final part of the inspecting of that workshop is a problem-solving workshop. So this is a retrospective, but all the members of the Agile Release Train can be involved, and it's not based around teams, it's based around problem statements. So the idea here is those issues, those impediments that are affecting the Agile Release Train, we write those up as problem statements, and then actually people from any of the teams can gather together and try and work out what the root cause of that is, and what possible changes could be made to tackle that root cause. And this diagram here is called a Ishikawa diagram, and it's just a technique for trying to work back to a root cause. And so those are the kind of techniques that will be used here. So what I'm going to do is these are the mainly Agile Release Train events. You've got PI planning, then you've got those synchronization events, either Art Sync or the Scrum of Scrums and PO Sync. You've got system demo that happens. These happens during the program increment, and at the end you have this inspect and adapt workshop where we get to see what's been delivered, and we get to collectively come up with some actions, some ideas to make the next programming even better. So art metrics and improvements. So if we look at the list of metrics that comes from Scaled Agile, they've got quite a few on there that you could do. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on some of these that I think are the most kind of useful. The first one is the program predictability measure. Then we're going to talk about cycle time, and we'll talk about deploys and releases. So the program predictability measure is this thing we've just been talking about, where the business owners give a score during PI planning and then rescore again during the system demo. And what we can do is we can add up those numbers and come up with a percentage. So here we've got 5 objectives from a team. One of them looks like it's pretty close. He's getting 6 out of 7. 3 of them spot on, and then one here where maybe they've scored it a 3 out of 5. It hasn't quite met everything they wanted to do, and so we work out a percentage there at 92%. And so for each program increment, we can track what this percentage is, how effective that team is about meeting the objectives, and we can summarize this up to the Agile Release Train kind of level. And actually, what we're aiming for here is somewhere between 80 and 100%. So 80% predictability is pretty good. Most business owners will say, look, if you're telling me stuff and you're going to deliver at least 80% of that, and I can rely on that as a business, then that's really moving forward. If a team's constantly getting 100%, then it probably means they're being too cautious with their objectives. They're not actually, they could potentially be doing more, and they could potentially take on a few more and risk occasionally, not getting the mark. But that's the kind of thing they're trying to do. So what you're trying to do is get into that 80 to 100% band. And part of the inspect and adapt process, if they did get a lower score at various points, why did that happen? What can we do to change that? How do we get into that 80 to 90%, 80 to 100% band? So that's the program predictability score. And the reason why I like this so much is it's not about, oh, how many features have you done or how many story points you've delivered or anything like that. It's how much value have we delivered to the organization. It's fundamentally what we're here for, delivery of value. So it's how good are we at doing that? So that's the program predictability score. Another thing to think about is cycle time, and what we're talking about here is cycle time of features. So these big things that were on the program backlog that the product manager's looking after, and that we're going to release and bring value to the organization. So if we look at these examples here, we've got, I'll just summarize it down to 4 teams. They're all working on features, and all the features kind of land right at the end of the kind of delivery part of the program increment. So we've got a cycle time of around 8 weeks. Team 1 is working on 2 different features. Team 2 is working on 2 different features. Team 3 is working on 1. Team 4 is working on 1. We could bring the cycle time down by maybe Team 1 focusing on really putting all their efforts on one of the features and then moving on to the other one. And we could potentially bring the cycle time down if teams 3 and 4 work together to deliver one of the features and then work together to deliver another of the features. So potentially by the end of the program increment, we've delivered the same stuff, and on the program value score, we get the same. But here, we're potentially able to release all these things early and get that value early. So that's what we're trying to do. So a shorter cycle time of features hopefully will lead to a realization of that value, that benefits sooner. And that's what we're trying to do. And this ties in with the final, suggested kind of measure that we work on, which is to do with the deployment. So deployments to production. So how frequently do you get your kind of code or systems onto a production system? So if you've got some really slick processes, that could be multiple times per day. If you've got more cumbersome processes, then potentially that's every couple of weeks, or every couple of iterations or stuff like that. So how quickly can you get it onto your production environment? And then there's a slightly separate question: how frequently do you actually release that to customers? So many people will have feature toggles so they can get the work on their production environment. They can kind of check it's stable from a technical perspective, but then they choose when the customers actually can see and interact with that. And obviously we don't want stuff, a holding cost of stuff being on the production environment not being used, not delivering that value. So we want to release frequently, but we want to do it on demand when we want it, to do that. So we can get it kind of done from a technical deployment perspective, and then separately release that to the customers when we're ready. So we want to measure those things, and in both cases what we want to do is increase the number of deployments and potentially increase the number of releases up to the point that it's our ideal, what we think is the right for our customers and our systems. So if we want to get our program predictability to 80 to 100%, let's support the teams who've got a low predictability. Let's find out why, uncover those root problems and deal with that. And also those events that we were talking about, at the arts sync or the PO sync, we want to be talking about those objectives as we go through. Are we still going to deliver these? Are we going to get the business value from these? And where we've got risks and reasons why we might be able to deliver them, there is an option in SAFe to use uncommitted objectives, which means that we don't kind of get scored for those at the beginning, because we're not saying we're going to deliver those. What we're saying is we can see value in it, and if we can overcome these risks, we'll have those. In terms of the cycle time, getting teams to work together, sharing features across teams, getting those mid program increment releases out to release the value. And to support that, if we invest in continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps type systems, we can have more frequent releases. Automated testing helps us with more frequent deployment and releases. And encouraging people not to think about a program increment as a big batch of stuff that gets delivered at the end, but where we have the possibility to add multiple releases as we go through. So those are the kind of metrics and kind of improvements